My family said, "Don't come home this year." Funny how quiet it got when I listened. So a week before Christmas, my dad texted me 7 words that cracked something inside me for good. "Don't come home this year, we've had enough." No greeting, no signature, just that, like a cold receipt after a lifetime of generosity. It was 5:14 p.m., the kind of Ohio evening where the sky turns the color of dishwater and the air smells like someone else's dinner. I was stirring chili, trying to convince myself that this year would be different, that maybe, just maybe, my family would see me as more than their financial safety net. My 12-year-old son, Eli, was at the kitchen table, building a Lego tower that leaned left like it was tired of trying. Then my phone buzzed, one notification, one sentence that changed everything. I didn't even react at first. I just kept stirring, like maybe if I pretended nothing happened, the world would stay intact. But the words kept flashing in my head like a broken neon sign. "Don't come home, home." The irony almost made me laugh. Because for years, I'd been the one keeping that home running, paying my dad's overdue truck insurance, my sister Brittany's student loans, even my parents' electric bill when it was about to be cut. Apparently, my generosity had an expiration date, and it ended at 5:14 p.m. Eli looked up from his Legos and said, "Mom, your face looks weird." "I'm fine," I lied. That's the thing about being a single mom. You get really good at lying, especially to protect the one person who still believes in you. I put my phone down, but it buzzed again, a message from the family group chat. Brittany reacted to Dad's text with a laughing emoji, a freaking laughing emoji. I stared at that stupid yellow face and felt something in my chest freeze solid. That was my sister's idea of empathy. Mock me publicly, then borrow money privately. See, Brittany was the golden child, always has been. She could burn down the house and still be called spirited. Meanwhile, I'd spend years cleaning up her ashes and still be called cold. She worked 3 jobs in a decade, never kept one longer than 6 months, and somehow I was the problem. My dad used to joke that I was born serious, like God forgot to install the fun part. Maybe that's why they loved Brittany more. She smiled prettier while failing louder. I scrolled back up to the message, hoping maybe I'd misread it. But nope. Stay away this Christmas. There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It gets inside your ribs and stays there. That's the kind I felt then. The heater clanked, the chili bubbled. Outside, snow tapped against the window like it was trying to warn me. This time, don't forgive them. What they didn't know, what they never cared to ask, was how tired I'd been. Not physically, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying people who never even thank you for the ride. They thought I liked it. Brittany once said, "Rachel enjoys fixing things. It makes her feel needed." No, Brittany, it made me feel trapped. It made me feel like love was a bill I kept paying so no one would shut me out. I wanted to text back something sharp, something that would make them flinch, but instead I just typed, "Then I'll stop paying the bills." And I hit send. No one replied. The group chat went dead, which was fine. Silence was more honest than any of their fake apologies. I washed the dishes, each plate clinking like punctuation to a sentence I should have said years ago. Then I dried my hands and sat on the couch, phone face down, heart weirdly steady. Because here's the truth. Anger burns fast, but clarity, it settles in slow like snow on asphalt. How? For the first time, I started remembering things clearly, like the time Dad said I should be grateful I had a real job, since Brittany was still finding herself. Or the Thanksgiving when I paid for dinner, and he bragged to everyone about how responsible his girls were, while my sister was 3 drinks deep, and Venmo requested me later for gas money. Every memory felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, and the picture they made wasn't pretty. Later that night, I opened my laptop and clicked into my family bills folder. Yes, an actual folder. Don't judge me. Years of habit. Every file was a reminder. The insurance I'd set up in my name for Dad, because he forgot his login. The Netflix subscription I'd started for the family so they'd feel less lonely during lockdown. The student loan autopay for Brittany that I covered just until she got back on her feet. Spoiler, she never did. I stared at the list, scrolling and scrolling until I felt something inside me snap. Not loudly, just cleanly, like a thread finally giving way. That's when I realized I'd been funding my own erasure. I wasn't part of their family, I was their financial infrastructure. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, Eli came over, holding a piece of Lego. "Mom, if the bottom isn't straight, the tower always falls," he said casually. I smiled, though it came out crooked. Yeah, kiddo, that's usually how it works. He had no idea he'd just described my whole life. I tucked him into bed later and stood by the window watching the snow come down harder, swallowing the streetlights. My phone buzzed again on the counter, lighting up with another group chat meme. Brittany posting some TikTok about family vibes. I didn't open it. Instead, I whispered to no one. Not this year. And for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. So after that text from my dad, I didn't cry, not even once. I think a younger version of me would have, back when I still believed that family meant unconditional love instead of unpaid invoices. But that night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was more like silence with a backbone. You know that calm you feel before a storm? That was me. Except this time, I was the storm. The next morning, I woke up early like I always do. Made coffee, packed Eli's lunch, stared at the snow piling up on my car like the world was daring me to dig myself out, literally and metaphorically. My phone kept buzzing with messages from Brittany. Hey, Dad didn't mean it. You know how he gets. Let's not make this awkward for Christmas. I read them all, put the phone face down, and whispered, Oh, sweetheart, it's already awkward. Here's the thing about being the reliable one. People don't notice your effort until you stop making it look easy. I'd been paying my family's bills for so long that even I forgot what it felt like not to carry their chaos. So that morning, I made myself a deal. I was done financing other people's irresponsibility. I opened my laptop, took a long sip of coffee, and clicked through my family bills folder again. For each one, I whispered the same words. Not my problem anymore. Click. Not my name anymore. Click. Not my circus. First, Dad's truck insurance. Cancelled. Then Brittany's student loan autopay. Disabled. Then the Wi-Fi at the house I no longer called home. Disconnected. Each tap felt like peeling off another layer of guilt I'd worn for years. It was quiet revenge, but damn, it felt holy. By noon, Brittany called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Rach, are you serious? Dad's trying to renew his insurance and the card's not going through. Can you just fix it real quick? Her voice had that same tone she used in high school whenever she wanted my notes for a test she didn't study for. I smiled, a small, tired smile, and thought, figure it out, genius. That night, after Eli went to bed, I opened a blank note on my laptop. Title, Ledger of Love. I started typing every single thing I'd paid for over the past 3 years. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed perspective. Rent, insurance, groceries, credit card fees, Brittany's emergency medical copay when she spent a weekend in Miami and called it heat exhaustion. The total made me dizzy. I'd basically been running a nonprofit called the Bank of Rachel. I sat back staring at the screen and laughed. The kind of laugh that sounds like a choke. How had I let it get this far? Maybe because love in my family was measured in transactions. The more you gave, the more you proved you cared. My dad used to say, that's just how families work, kiddo. We look out for each other. But what he meant was, you look out for us, we'll look the other way. The next day at work, my coworker Jen noticed I was quieter than usual. She's the kind of woman who brings homemade cookies to the office just because Wednesday deserves it. She asked, everything okay? And I almost said no, but instead I shrugged. Family stuff. She nodded like she understood, then said, you know, my therapist says boundaries are love with clarity. That line stuck with me all day. Boundaries. I'd never had those. Just obligations with lipstick. That night, I decided to make something for Eli, a new kind of tradition. We built a gingerbread house together, our annual December project. Except this time, I didn't care if it looked perfect. I let him put the gumdrops wherever he wanted, even when the roof started collapsing. It's okay, Mom, he said, holding it up with a candy cane like a tiny architect. We can fix it, I smiled. Yeah, but maybe next time we'll build it stronger from the start. Later, after he went to sleep, I walked into the garage and stared at the car I'd planned to gift my dad that Christmas. A used but spotless silver sedan I'd spent months saving for. It was supposed to be my olive branch, my peace offering. I ran my hand over the hood and felt this mix of anger and grief twist together in my chest. That car wasn't a gift anymore. It was a monument to my own stupidity. The next few days, the silence from my family turned weirdly loud. You could feel their panic through the group chat. Messages like, does anyone know why the power's out? or who changed the Netflix password. Brittany even texted, "This is petty, Rachel, you're acting crazy." I didn't respond. Instead, I printed the ledger of love and slid it into a red folder labeled Freedom. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. By the weekend, my mom called. She's always been the peacemaker, the soft one. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "your father didn't mean to hurt you." I took a deep breath. "Mom, he didn't mean not to either." There was a pause on the line, then she whispered, "You sound different." "I am," I said. "For the first time, I'm not buying my way into this family." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. Snow was falling again, slow and soft, covering everything that had once looked ugly. I thought about all the times I jumped in to fix things, to earn my place, to prove I was worth keeping. And for what? A text that said stay away? I decided then that this Christmas, I wouldn't beg for a seat at a table that kept asking me to pay the bill. I had my own table now, small, messy, and full of real peace. And maybe, just maybe, that was the best kind of revenge. It happened 3 days before Christmas. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and that red folder, the one I'd labeled Freedom, when I realized I didn't owe anyone my silence anymore. For years, I'd carried their weight, covered their mistakes, and kept their secrets. But the funny thing about silence is that once you break it, it never comes back the same way. That night, I opened the family group chat, took a deep breath, and hit send on 3 photos. The silver sedan in my garage, a velvet watch box meant for my dad, and a page from the Ledger of Love, my neat little list of everything I'd ever paid for. No caption, no explanation, just evidence. At first, nothing happened. The chat went eerily quiet, like a frozen lake right before it cracks. Then one by one, the little scene notifications appeared. Dad, Brittany, Mom, even my uncle, who hadn't texted in months. I swear I could almost hear the panic traveling through their phones. A few minutes later, Brittany sent, "What's this supposed to mean?" I didn't reply, then Dad chimed in. "If this is about Christmas, we can talk privately." And I remember smiling, this small, almost sad smile, thinking, of course he wants it private. He's fine hurting me publicly, but panics when the truth gets an audience. 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Aunt Carol, the one relative who never joined the gossip chain, texted me privately, "Honey, did you really pay all those bills? For how long?" I told her the truth. Every year, every receipt, every quiet, "Don't worry, I've got it." Her response came back fast. "That's not love, Rachel, that's labor." That line hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about money. It was about emotional debt I'd been repaying my whole life. The next day, things escalated. My uncle posted a long message in the chat. You know, one of those all-caps rants that starts with, "I'm not taking sides, but," and then immediately takes a side. He basically called my dad and Brittany out, saying how they'd taken advantage of me for years while pretending to be the victims. He even reminded everyone about the Thanksgiving when I paid for dinner and Dad bragged about raising independent daughters. That's when the chat exploded. Brittany sent a string of angry texts. "This is so out of context. Rachel's being dramatic like always." Then a second later, "You're trying to humiliate us right before Christmas?" That's when I realized something wild. They were more upset about being exposed than about what they'd actually done. That was their hierarchy of morality. Image first, truth last. I didn't respond. Instead, I uploaded one final photo, a screenshot of the ledger's last line that read, "Total paid, $47,982. Beneath it, I typed, "Since you've had enough of me, I figured I'd show you what enough really looks like." And then, silence. Beautiful, heavy silence, the kind that fills a room like fresh snow. For the next few hours, I didn't check my phone. I made dinner for Eli, helped him glue popsicle sticks for his little bridge project, and pretended life was normal. But around 8 p.m., the phone buzzed again. First came a message from Aunt Carol, "Proud of you," then one from Mom, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was this bad." That one stung because she did know, deep down. She just didn't want to choose sides, but I still appreciated the apology. Then at 8:13, Brittany sent, "Wow, you're really going to air our dirty laundry like this? Over money?" I finally replied, "No, Britt, over respect." A few minutes later, Dad wrote, "You've made your point. but family doesn't need receipts. And for the first time in my life, I laughed, out loud. You're right, Dad, I whispered to myself. Family shouldn't need receipts, but you made me keep them. By 9 p.m., the group chat was chaos. Uncles, cousins, a few relatives I barely remembered. Everyone had something to say. My dad tried to steer it back, writing, "Let's keep this between us. Family drama doesn't belong online." And that's when Aunt Carol dropped the nuclear line. It's not drama when it's accountability. I swear I almost stood up and clapped. Meanwhile, Brittany kept trying to spin it. I never asked for her help, she wrote. She just likes being the hero. Then Uncle Greg responded, "So why were you paying her back with emojis?" I could almost feel the room temperature drop across miles. Brittany stopped replying after that. While everyone else argued, I sat on the couch with Eli, watching some cheesy Christmas movie about forgiveness and family. Halfway through, he looked at me and said, "Mom, why do you look so calm?" And I told him the truth. Because for the first time, I'm not carrying something that doesn't belong to me. At 10 p.m., my dad tried calling, twice. I let it ring, then he texted, "You're overreacting. Nobody owes anybody anything. Stop making a scene." And that, right there, was the sentence that erased any doubt I had about walking away. Because when someone reduces your pain to a scene, they've already written your part in their play. And I wasn't acting anymore. Still, there was this strange mixture of freedom and grief sitting in my chest. You don't realize how much of your identity is tied to being needed until nobody needs you, or until you stop letting them. Around midnight, I opened my laptop again, scrolling through the photos I'd sent. The car, the watch, the ledger, proof not of generosity, but of exhaustion. And I remember thinking, maybe this is what healing actually looks like. Messy, loud, inconvenient, but real. The next morning, I woke up to 50 new messages, half from relatives applauding me, half from Dad and Brittany doubling down on their victim act. "You've embarrassed this family," Dad wrote. "You've turned us into gossip." But here's the thing. You can't embarrass people who already live in denial. All I did was show them a mirror. By that evening, I decided to send one last message. The kind of mic drop you only get once in a lifetime. I typed, "I used to think love meant sacrifice. Turns out, love means boundaries, and this is mine." Then I muted the chat and went to help Eli test his popsicle bridge. He placed a stack of quarters on top, holding his breath. The bridge shook, but didn't break. "It held," he shouted. I laughed. "Of course it did, baby. We built it right this time." And somewhere deep down, I realized I'd just done the same thing. Built something that could finally hold. Not for them, but for us. 2 days after the Ledger Christmas, I woke up to the sound of knocking. It wasn't the friendly kind either. It was that impatient, echoing knock you hear in movies right before something awkward happens. I peeked through the curtain and sure enough, there they were, my dad and Brittany, standing on my porch in matching Family First sweatshirts, like some kind of twisted Hallmark parody. My stomach dropped, but not from fear. It was something else. I think it was relief. Because now, finally, I'd get to see them without all the noise of the group chat. Just us. Just truth. When I opened the door, Dad tried to smile. That practiced politician-like grin he used whenever he wanted to dodge accountability. Brittany was next to him, arms crossed, mascara smudged, looking like she'd been crying, or pretending to. "Can we come in?" Dad asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I stepped aside, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted this conversation done. The second they walked in, I felt the air shift. Brittany started talking first, in that high-pitched tone she uses when she's nervous. "Rachel, this whole thing's gotten blown out of proportion. You embarrassed Dad, you embarrassed me. You didn't have to make it public." I almost laughed. "Public? Britt, it was a family chat. If you can't handle your reflection, don't stand in front of the mirror." Dad cleared his throat. "Enough. We didn't come here to argue." He held out a small box, gold wrapping paper, and a sloppy bow on top. "Merry Christmas," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Let's just move past this." I didn't take it. "What's in it?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. It's a watch. Thought you could use something nice." That made me laugh for real this time. Sharp and unkind. "You already gave me one of those," I said. "Except yours doesn't tell time. It just runs on guilt." For a moment, no one said anything. Then Brittany suddenly burst into tears. Or maybe it was performance art. You think I'm a bad person, she sobbed, but you don't know what I've been dealing with. And right then she blurted it out. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. My dad's face went white. Apparently he didn't know either. She kept talking, words spilling everywhere. About the boyfriend who left, about how scared she was, about how she didn't have money or insurance. And I swear I felt something strange inside me. Not anger, not pity exactly. Just clarity. Because I finally saw it for what it was. This cycle. The endless handouts, the emotional blackmail disguised as family love. Every generation of our family had been trained to guilt the responsible one into saving everyone else. And somehow, I'd been the fool who thought my love could break that pattern. But love isn't a rescue mission. It's a choice. I walked to the kitchen counter, grabbed the red folder, and placed it between us. You see this? I said quietly. This isn't revenge. It's a record of reality. I'm done pretending we're something we're not. Brittany tried to speak, but I held up my hand. You're going to be a mom, Britt. You don't get to raise another human on a lie. If you want to be better, start with honesty. Stop expecting people to save you. Dad finally lost it. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Acting like you've got it all figured out. I gave you everything. His voice cracked on that last word, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, but shame. The kind that takes decades to surface. You didn't give me everything, Dad, I said softly. You taught me how to survive without you. And just like that, the fight went out of him. He sat down, shoulders slumped, and for the first time in my life, he looked smaller than me. Brittany wiped her face, sniffled, and whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you, Rach. I nodded, not forgiving, but acknowledging. I know, but that doesn't make it okay. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy, but clean, like the air after a thunderstorm. I think we all realized, in our own ways, that something irreversible had just happened. The hierarchy had collapsed. I wasn't the mule of the family anymore. I was the line in the sand. Before they left, Aunt Carol showed up. Apparently, she'd been on her way over already. She stepped inside, took one look at Dad and Brittany, and then at me, and said, Well, looks like the truth finally moved in. Dad muttered something about needing air and walked out. Brittany followed, clutching the watchbox like a lifeline. After they left, Carol sat down and poured herself a cup of coffee from my pot, like she owned the place. You did the right thing, she said. You broke a cycle. That's the hardest kind of love there is. I nodded, still staring at the empty spot by the door where my family had stood. It doesn't feel good, I admitted. It's not supposed to, she said. Growth never does. Later that night, I went out to the garage again and looked at the silver sedan, the one I'd once imagined gifting to Dad. I thought about all the times I'd tried to buy my way into belonging. Then I took the keys, drove it to a local women's shelter, and donated it. When the lady at the desk asked, Who should I put on the paperwork as donor? I smiled. Just write someone who finally learned her worth. Driving home in the cold night, I realized the anger was gone. What was left wasn't revenge. It was peace. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that hums under your skin like steady electricity. It's the sound of freedom, and it's louder than forgiveness. When I got home, Eli was waiting up for me on the couch, blanket wrapped around him, eyes half closed. You okay, Mom? He asked. I kissed his forehead and said, Yeah, kiddo, I think I finally am. Christmas morning came quietly that year. No buzzing phone, no guilt-laced Merry Christmas texts. Just the faint hum of the heater, snow tapping against the windows, and Eli's small footsteps padding down the hall. Mom, he whispered, peeking into my room. Can we open them now? His voice was pure excitement, the kind you can't fake. I smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from deep in your chest. Go ahead, I said, pulling the blanket tighter around me. He tore through the wrapping paper in seconds, his little hands moving faster than my heart could process. New sneakers, a book about space, and the gaming console he'd been talking about since last summer. When he saw it, his face lit up like the damn tree. You got it? For real? He said, eyes wide. All yours, I replied. He ran over and hugged me, tight and quick. The kind of hug that makes everything else fade into background noise. Best Christmas ever, he whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed it. There was no tension in the air, no tiptoeing around unspoken drama, just warmth. Honest, simple warmth. Around noon, my mom showed up with a casserole dish that smelled like heaven and nostalgia. She looked tired but peaceful. "Just us girls today," she said, setting the dish on the counter, but her eyes drifted to Eli, who grinned at her. "And one boy who eats like 3 grown men," I said, laughing. She smiled, then added quietly, "Your dad didn't go to church. He said he couldn't face anyone." I didn't know how to feel about that. Pity? Satisfaction? Maybe both. "And Brittany?" I asked. Mom hesitated. "She's showing, just a little. Scared but quiet. Different." I nodded. "Different's a good start," I said. Mom looked at me, something soft in her eyes. "You know," she whispered. "She said you were right." That stopped me cold. About what? About everything. About boundaries. About love not being a debt. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the snow outside, each flake falling slow and steady, like time taking its time. "People don't change overnight," I said finally. "But maybe she'll raise her baby differently." "I think she will," Mom said. "And that's because you finally said no." That sentence hit me like a quiet truth I'd been avoiding. Saying no wasn't cruel, it was love with structure. That evening, we had dinner with Aunt Carol and a few cousins. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken, laughter, and no sight of guilt for once. Carol poured me a glass of wine and raised it. "To boundaries," she said with a smirk. I clinked my glass with hers. "And to not apologizing for having them," I added. Everyone laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that heals, not hides. When we finished eating, Eli asked if he could show everyone his bridge project. He ran to the kitchen and came back holding his little popsicle stick bridge. "It held, Grandma," he said proudly, "even with quarters on it." Mom smiled. "Well, that's because you built it right, sweetheart." Eli nodded seriously. "Yeah, Mom says you gotta start with a strong base, or everything falls apart." Everyone looked at me and smiled, but I just shrugged. "Kid's not wrong," I said. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat by the fire, holding a mug of cocoa. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way that used to feel empty, but now felt earned. My phone buzzed once. A single text from Brittany. "Thank you for stopping the cycle. I didn't see it until you made me look." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "You'll do better. That's enough." I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't need recognition or redemption. I had something better. Peace that didn't depend on anyone else's behavior. The kind that's quiet but solid, like the hum of the fridge at midnight when everything else is still. On New Year's Eve, snow fell again. Eli was on the floor, building another bridge out of Legos this time. He looked up and said, "You think it'll hold, Mom?" I smiled. "Only one way to find out." He placed a toy car on top, and it wobbled for a second before steadying. "It works," he shouted. "Told you," I said, sipping my cocoa. "We build strong now." He looked up at me, eyes big and honest. "You're really happy, huh?" I paused, feeling the warmth spread through me like light. "Yeah, kiddo, I really am." And that was the truth. After years of trying to buy love, fix people, and hold bridges that weren't mine to hold, I finally learned the secret. You don't earn peace by keeping everyone else comfortable. You earn it by standing still when the storm passes and realizing you survived it. That night, I whispered to myself, "No more buying my way home." Because home wasn't something they could give or take. Home was this: the soft laughter of my son, the quiet hum of the heater, the snow still falling outside, and a woman who finally knew her worth. Looking back now, I think the hardest part wasn't cutting them off. It was realizing how long I'd been cutting pieces off myself just to keep them whole. For years, I thought love meant saying yes, fixing everything, paying the bill, both the literal and emotional ones. But the truth is, love without respect isn't love. It's servitude dressed up as loyalty. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop showing up for people who refuse to see your worth. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. What I've learned is this: silence can keep the peace, but it can also keep you small. The moment you speak up, things might fall apart, but only the things that were never real to begin with. In this life, you'll meet people who mistake your kindness for weakness, your generosity for duty. Don't let them. You can care deeply and still draw the line. You can forgive, but still close the door. And trust me, there's nothing lonelier than trying to earn love from people who only value your usefulness. They finally apologized weeks later. I forgave them, but this time on my terms. From a distance, with both feet planted firmly on the ground, I built myself. Because peace isn't found in approval, it's found in boundaries. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever had to walk away from people you love just to find yourself again, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories about resilience, justice, and second chances. Take care of yourself tonight. Breathe deep. Let go. You deserve a quiet kind of peace, the kind you don't have to earn anymore.